A dying leopard cub held a ranger's hand for hours, and his next move made everyone cry. But what started as a heartbreaking rescue quickly spirals into something far more dangerous. Because this wasn't just about saving one helpless animal, it was about exposing a hidden world no one was supposed to see. Behind the fences lies a secret so dark, it could destroy reputations, lives, and even the ranger himself. Every step he takes brings him closer to the truth and closer to those determined to silence him forever. The cub's grip was only the beginning. What happens when the fight to save one life uncovers a web of lies powerful enough to burn everything down? Will courage be enough to survive what comes next? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Ranger Greer Langford's truck kicked up dust along the private road leading to Rusty Kincaid's Big Cat Ranch. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, the anonymous tip from earlier that morning weighing heavy on his mind. 15 years of wildlife ranger work had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming that something wasn't right. The ranch's entrance was deceptively welcoming. Pristine white fencing stretched as far as the eye could see, and colorful sponsorship banners fluttered in the hot breeze. Kincaid's Haven for Big Cats read one banner in bold letters, while others displayed logos of well-known wildlife conservation groups. It was a perfect picture of legitimacy, but Greer knew better than to trust appearances. He parked his truck near the main compound and stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel. The air was thick with the familiar sense of hay and animal feed, mixed with something else, something wrong. Following his nose and the information from the tip, he made his way to a shed tucked away in a shaded corner of the property. The structure looked ordinary enough, but as Greer approached, his heart sank. The smell of sickness and neglect grew stronger. He pulled open the heavy wooden door, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness inside. What he found made his jaw clench tight. A wire crate sat in the corner, and inside lay a leopard cub, its spotted coat dulled by illness and malnutrition. The animal's ribs showed clearly through its skin, and its breathing was shallow and labored. Its eyes, which should have been bright and alert, were clouded and filmy. "Dear Lord," Greer whispered, kneeling beside the crate. He'd seen cases of neglect before, but this hit him hard. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old. Following protocol, he reached carefully through the wire to check the cub's vitals. The moment his fingers touched the animal's fur, something unexpected happened. The cub's paw shot out, wrapping around his fingers with surprising strength. Those cloudy eyes fixed on his face, and Greer felt something deep in his chest crack open. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, his free hand already reaching for his radio. "I'm getting you out of here." He called in his find and requested an emergency seizure warrant. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, professional but hesitant. "Copy that. Ranger Langford, sending the request to the courthouse now." Minutes ticked by. The cub's grip remained firm on his fingers, as if afraid he might leave. Greer kept track of each labored breath, growing more concerned as time stretched on. 1 hour passed, then 2. His calls for updates were met with the same response. Still under review. The cub's condition was deteriorating. Its breathing grew more irregular, and still, that small paw held onto him like a lifeline. Greer had played by the rules his entire career, had watched the system work and sometimes fail, but this was different. This wasn't about procedure anymore. It was about right and wrong. With his free hand, he activated his body camera and spoke clearly into it. "This is Ranger Greer Langford, badge number 2. I am invoking emergency seizure under exigent circumstances due to immediate danger to the animal's life. Time is 14:27 hours. His decision made, Greer carefully lifted the entire crate, mindful of the cub still clutching his fingers. The metal wire dug into his arms, but he barely noticed. As he emerged from the shed into the harsh sunlight, he saw several ranch hands had gathered, their phones raised to record him. "That's theft of private property," one of them called out, his voice carrying a threat. "Mr. Kincaid won't take kindly to this." Greer kept walking, his steps steady and purposeful. "This isn't theft," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "This is a rescue, and it's all being recorded." The ranch hands continued filming as he made his way to his truck, their muttered accusations following him like shadows. With careful movements, he secured the crate in the passenger seat, the cub's paw still holding tight to his fingers as he climbed behind the wheel. As he drove away from Kincaid's ranch, Greer's mind was already racing through the consequences. He'd bypassed proper channels, violated procedure, and made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the county. But looking down at the small paw gripping his hand, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Veterinary clinic he trusted was 45 minutes away, and every minute counted. The cub's grip never loosened during the drive, and Greer found himself talking softly, offering whatever comfort he could. "Hang in there, little fighter. We're almost there." His body camera continued recording, documenting every moment, every labored breath, every mile driven with one hand, because a dying leopard cub wouldn't let go of the other. It would serve as evidence later. He knew, either in his defense or in the proceedings that might end his career. But in this moment, watching the road stretch out before him and feeling that trusting grip on his fingers, Greer Langford couldn't bring himself to care about anything except getting this little one to safety. The consequences would come. He had no doubts about that. Rusty Kincaid's influence ran deep, and Greer had just challenged it in the most public way possible. But some lines couldn't be crossed. Some compromises couldn't be made. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant standing your ground, even if you had to stand alone. And right now, with a desperate cub's paw locked around his fingers like a promise, Greer knew he'd found his line in the sand. Whatever came next, he would face it knowing he'd chosen the path his conscience could live with. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary clinic hummed overhead as Dr. Juniper Shaw worked swiftly to stabilize the leopard cub. Her auburn hair had fallen loose from its usual neat bun, and worry lines creased her forehead as she inserted an IV line with practiced care. "Poor little one," she murmured, adjusting the heating pad beneath the cub's frail body. "Let's get some fluids in you." Greer sat nearby at a small desk, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard as he typed up his incident report. The cub had finally released its grip on his hand during the drive to the clinic, but he could still feel the phantom pressure of those tiny paws. "Temperature's coming up," Juniper reported, checking the digital readout. "The fluids are helping too. Another few hours, and we should see improvement." The sharp trill of Greer's phone cut through the quiet clinic. He answered, his face darkening as he listened to the clipped voice on the other end. "Suspended. On what grounds?" His voice rose slightly. "Sir, that animal would have died if I'd waited any longer for." He fell silent, jaw clenching as he listened. "Yes, sir. I understand. Pending investigation." Juniper looked up from her patient. "Trouble? Department's suspending me for seizing, without a warrant." Greer ran a hand through his hair. "Effective immediately, but you had probable cause. The cub was dying." Juniper's pale eyes flashed with indignation. "Doesn't matter. Kincaid's already crying theft." He showed her his phone, where social media was lighting up with videos of him carrying the crate to his truck. The ranch hands had worked fast to spread their version of events. As the night wore on, the story took on a life of its own. The image of the cub clinging to Greer's hand had been captured on someone's phone and was spreading like wildfire. Comments poured in from across the country. "True hero. Saving that poor baby. Finally, someone standing up to these private zoos. God bless this ranger." But for every supportive message, there was Kincaid's social media team was working overtime, painting Greer as a rogue officer who had stolen private property without cause or warrant. By morning, Greer's phone buzzed with more bad news. Kincaid's high-powered attorneys had secured an emergency order from Judge Marshall. All seized animals had to be returned within 72 hours, or Greer would face criminal charges. Juniper's hands trembled slightly as she checked the cub's vital signs. "The cub's not strong enough to go back," she said softly. "Not yet. You've worked for Kincaid's ranch for a while now," Greer said carefully. "What's your take on their operation?" "Their operation?" Juniper glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. "The records never add up. I've seen cubs listed with impossible birth dates, weights that don't match their ages." She swallowed hard. "But I can't. I mean, I'm still technically on their payroll." "I understand," Greer said quietly. "You don't have to say more." The clinic door swung open, and Greer's younger brother Cade strode in. His ranch security uniform was crisp, the silver badge catching the light. The brothers shared the same strong jaw and broad shoulders, but where Greer's eyes held warmth, Cade's were cold. "You need to drop this, Greer," Cade said without preamble. "Return the cub. Apologize to Mr. Kincaid. Maybe you can keep your badge." "No, what's happening at that ranch isn't right," Greer responded. Cade stepped closer, voice dropping. "What I know is Kincaid has friends. Good friends. Judge Marshall isn't the only one at the courthouse who owes him favors. You really want to go up against that?" The threat hung in the air between them. Juniper busied herself with the cub's charts, pretending not to hear. 3 days, Cade continued. "That's all you've got to fix this before it gets ugly." He turned and left, boots echoing on the linoleum floor. Greer walked over to the recovery kennel where the cub lay sleeping. Its breathing was stronger now, but still shallow. He thought about his badge, the career he'd built over 15 years. Then he thought about those tiny paws gripping his fingers, trusting him to help. 72 hours. 3 days to choose, between his badge and his conscience. 3 days to find proof of what was really happening at Kincaid's ranch. 3 days to save not just this cub, but all the animals hidden behind those pristine white fences. The weight of his suspension notice sat heavy in his pocket, but the weight of responsibility sat heavier on his shoulders. The clock was ticking. The early morning sun streamed through the clinic windows as Greer returned, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. The leopard cub lay sleeping under warm blankets, an IV drip steadily flowing into its tiny body. Dr. Juniper Shaw stood nearby, checking vital signs and making notes on her clipboard. "I need to scan for a microchip," Greer said softly, not wanting to disturb the cub's rest. "Standard procedure," Juniper nodded. reaching for the handheld scanner. I was waiting for you to do that. Didn't want to risk missing anything important. Greer ran the scanner over the cub's neck and shoulder area. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the device beeped, a string of numbers appearing on its small screen. His heart skipped a beat as he input the code into his tablet. Got something? Juniper asked, noticing his expression change. Yeah, Greer breathed, staring at the screen. This cub was reported stolen 3 months ago, in Tennessee. The revelation hung heavy in the air. What had seemed like a straightforward animal cruelty case had just become something much bigger and much more dangerous. Across state lines? Juniper whispered. That means federal trafficking charges, Greer finished. He pulled out his notebook and began organizing his notes with meticulous care. Every detail mattered now. The exact time he'd received the anonymous tip. When he'd arrived at Kincaid's ranch. The stall tactics with the seizure warrant. The moment he'd declared emergency intervention. Chain of custody had to be ironclad. We need help, he said finally, pulling out his phone. Someone who can dig deeper and get the word out. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Sutton Hale answered on the second ring. Greer Langford, the sharp voice came through. I've been following your little standoff with Kincaid. Fascinating stuff. It just got more fascinating, Greer replied. How'd you like to look into some interstate trafficking? He could practically hear Sutton's smile. I'm listening. For the next 20 minutes, Greer laid out everything he knew, including his suspicions about the courthouse delays and the convenient timing of his suspension. I need someone to dig into public records, donor lists, anything connecting Kincaid to people who might be helping him cover this up. Consider it done, Sutton said. I'll start pulling threads right away. After hanging up, Greer turned back to Juniper, who had been pretending not to listen while checking the cub's bandages. Level with me, he said quietly. What else have you noticed at the ranch? Anything that didn't add up? Juniper's hands stilled. The records are a mess, she admitted. Birth dates that don't match physical development. Weight charts that make no sense. Cubs appearing with paperwork claiming they're from breeding pairs we don't have. She shook her head. I tried asking questions at first, but Kincaid pays well to keep questions to a minimum. Greer finished. It's not just the money, she said. There's been pressure. Subtle hints about what happens to people who make trouble. Greer nodded grimly. He had one more person to talk to, though he wasn't looking forward to it. He found Cade during his brother's lunch break, in the small diner where they'd eaten together since they were kids. His younger brother looked tired, shadows under his eyes as he picked at his food. Need to ask you something, Greer said, sliding into the booth. Off the record, Cade's jaw tightened. Don't put me in this position, Greer. Just tell me about deliveries at the ranch, the ones that happen at night, the ones that don't go in the books. His brother wouldn't meet his eyes, pushing his plate away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Cade stood up, dropping some cash on the table. I can't help you, he said quietly, but the way his voice shook told Greer everything he needed to know. Back at the clinic, Greer stared through the observation window at the sleeping cub. The rescue ranch sign he'd passed so many times at Kincaid's property flashed in his mind, all those polished banners, thanking donors, the carefully cultivated image of a sanctuary, but now he saw it for what it really was. A front for something much darker. The cub's microchip had blown the lid off something bigger than he'd imagined. Stolen exotic cats, moved across state lines, laundered through a legitimate-looking rescue operation, the perfect cover, who would question someone claiming to help animals in need. Dr. Shaw appeared beside him, her reflection joining his in the window glass. What happens now? She asked. Now, Greer said, we follow the evidence, every scrap of it, because somewhere out there are more cubs like this one, and we're going to find them. The cub stirred in its sleep, paw twitching as if reaching out. Greer pressed his hand against the glass, remembering how those small claws had gripped his fingers, refusing to let go. He wouldn't let go either. Not now. Not when he finally understood what they were really up against. Greer sat in his truck outside the local coffee shop, drumming his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. Through the window, he could see Sutton hailed at a corner table, her laptop open, and a voice recorder ready. After their initial phone conversation, she'd agreed to meet in person, away from both the ranch and the clinic. Taking a deep breath, he walked inside. Sutton looked up, her shrewd eyes taking his measure. She was younger than he'd expected for someone with her reputation. Maybe early 30s, with quick movements and an intense focus. Ranger Langford, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her, or should I say suspended Ranger Langford. Just Greer is fine. He settled into the chair, noting how she'd positioned herself to see both exits. Thanks for coming. Your story interests me, Sutton said, keeping her voice low. Especially the part about the warrant delay, but I need more than one incident to justify an investigation. That's why I called you. Greer pulled out his phone, showing her photos he'd taken of the cub's condition. This isn't isolated. I've got Dr. Shaw's medical records showing inconsistencies, and my brother, he works security there. He's noticed patterns. Sutton leaned forward. You're asking me to embed off the record? At first, just observe. If we can prove what's happening, I'll need verification. Multiple sources, paper trails. You'll have them. Greer explained about Juniper's willingness to share records and Cade's inside position. Later that afternoon, Greer met with Juniper at the clinic. She looked over her shoulder before pulling out a thick folder of medical logs. I've been keeping copies, she said, her hands shaking slightly. The weights don't match up with their advertised ages. Birth dates change between documents. And these procurement requests, she spread out several papers. The numbers don't add up. Greer studied the documents, noting discrepancies. Can I take photos? Juniper nodded. Be careful, though. Kincaid has friends everywhere. That evening, Cade met him at their mother's house, ostensibly for dinner. In the garage, away from windows, his younger brother spoke in hushed tones. Deliveries come Tuesday nights, usually between 11 and 2 in the morning, Cade said, not meeting Greer's eyes. Feeding schedules are staggered, so visitors never see the same cats twice in one area. They rotate them like inventory. You get me the schedule. Cade hesitated. I can text you when things are happening. That's all I can risk right now. The next step required careful coordination. Sutton posed as a potential donor during one of the ranch's rescue tour days, while she kept staff occupied with questions. Greer and Juniper documented cage numbers and matched them against shipping receipts Cade had photographed. Look at this, Sutton whispered, showing Greer her phone. Same tiger, different name, different story, used in 3 separate rescue videos over 6 months. They gathered in Juniper's office after hours, spreading their evidence across her desk. Shipping manifests showed cats arriving from out of state. Medical records listed conflicting ages and conditions. Feeding schedules revealed how animals were moved to create the illusion of a fuller facility. It's a shell game, Greer said, organizing photos. They're cycling cats through here, using the same ones for different stories, different donation. Drives the public sees what they want to see, Sutton added. Happy rescue stories, cute cubs, feel-good moments. Nobody questions where they all come from. Juniper pointed to a series of weight records. These numbers are impossible. No cub gains and loses weight this drastically naturally. They're mixing up the paperwork between different animals. Working late into the night, they assembled their findings into a coherent timeline. Greer prepared a packet for his department, knowing it had to be bulletproof to overcome Kincaid's influence. Are you sure about this? Cade asked. When Greer showed him the final document, Kincaid's got half the courthouse in his pocket. Someone up the chain has to care, Greer insisted. One honest supervisor, that's all we need. They made copies, stored backups in secure locations. Sutton kept her recorder running, documenting their process. The evidence was clear. Dates didn't match. Weights fluctuated impossibly. Transport documents contradicted public stories. I'll roll this out carefully, Sutton promised. Start with the paperwork, irregularities. Build to the bigger picture. We need to make it impossible to ignore. Greer looked at their small group. A suspended ranger, a cautious vet, a reluctant insider, and a determined journalist. It wasn't much of an alliance, but it was a start. The proof was there in the files before them, each piece adding to a pattern that couldn't be explained away. Remember, he told them, we're not just collecting evidence, we're fighting for every animal like that leopard cub. Whatever happens next, we've got the truth on our side. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Greer and Sutton headed out to check on a lead about suspicious deliveries at the ranch. Their early start meant the back roads were empty, winding through the countryside like ribbons of asphalt between the sleeping farms. Thanks for coming with me on this one, Greer said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Having a witness helps when things get twisted around later. Sutton nodded, her recorder tucked safely in her bag. Smart thinking. After what we've uncovered, so far, I wouldn't put anything past her. Words cut off in a gasp, as Greer pressed the brake pedal approaching a sharp curve. Nothing happened. He pumped the pedal frantically, but the truck kept barreling forward. No brakes, he shouted, downshifting quickly to slow their momentum. The truck fishtailed, tires screaming against the pavement. Up ahead, the low-water bridge stretched across the creek, its metal guardrails gleaming in the early light. Sutton gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white. The shoulder can we. Greer fought the steering wheel, trying to keep them straight as they skidded. The truck slammed into the bridge's guard post with a horrific screech of metal on metal, the impact spinning them sideways. They came to a stop just yards from the drop into the creek bed below. For a long moment, they sat in stunned silence, the only sound there, heavy breathing, and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. You okay? Greer finally managed. Turning to Sutton, she nodded shakily. Yeah, I think so. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. I'm calling a tow truck, and the police within an hour. The tow operator had the truck up on the flatbed. He slid out from underneath, wiping his hands on a rag. Found your problem? He said grimly. Brake line's been cut clean through. No way that's an accident. Greer's jaw tightened as he took photos with his phone. He'd been a ranger long enough to know the difference between mechanical failure and sabotage. This was a message, loud and cleared out at the sheriff's office. Greer filed a formal report. his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. But when he tried to connect it to the ongoing investigation, presenting the microchip evidence from the rescued cub, he hit another wall. The same judge who'd issued the 72-hour return order now ruled the microchip evidence inadmissible, citing problems with chain of custody. It was a flimsy excuse that reeked of influence. Within hours, Kincaid's legal team launched their counterattack. Social media lit up with posts claiming Greer had staged the original rescue video for attention, calling him an attention-seeking vigilante who'd stolen a healthy animal for internet fame. Back at the clinic, Juniper paced the examination room, her face pale. "I heard about the brake line," she said. "This is getting seriously dangerous." Greer, he could see the conflict in her eyes. She knew more, probably enough to blow the whole case wide open, but speaking out would mean the end of her career. Years of education and dedication, gone in an instant. "I know what they're capable of," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The things I've seen. But if I talk, I'll never work in veterinary medicine again. They'll make sure of it." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I want to help. I do. But I'm scared." Greer's phone buzzed with another text from Cade. Unlike his usually detailed messages, this one was terse. "Watch your back. Men talking. Not good." A few minutes later, another brief message. "Ranch on alert. Be careful." The growing silence from his brother spoke volumes. Whatever was happening at the ranch had Cade spooked enough to pull back, to protect himself while still trying to warn Greer. Sitting in his temporary vehicle that evening, Greer stared at the collection of evidence he'd gathered. The microchip data was solid, the documentation clear, but none of it mattered if the system itself was rigged against him. Every move he made was being countered, every piece of evidence suppressed or discredited. The cut brake line wasn't just an attack, it was a demonstration of power. They could reach him anywhere, influence any part of the process, and twist the truth to suit their narrative. The message was clear: back off, or next time they wouldn't miss. But as he looked at the photo of that leopard cub clinging to his hand, Greer knew he couldn't stop. Someone had to stand up to Kincaid's operation, no matter the cost. The question was, how many more obstacles would be thrown in his path before he could expose the truth? He opened his text messages, thumbing through Cade's increasingly anxious warnings. His brother's fear was palpable, even through the short texts, each one more guarded than the last. Whatever was happening at the ranch had everyone on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The clock on the clinic wall ticked past midnight. As Greer finished reviewing another set of documents, the only sounds were the quiet hum of medical equipment and the occasional rustle of paper. He looked up when he heard footsteps approaching. Juniper stood in the doorway, her face drawn and pale in the fluorescent light. "I can't keep quiet anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "What happened today with your truck? Someone could have died. I need to tell you everything." Greer set down his papers and gestured to the chair across from him. Juniper sat down heavily, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The birth logs? You've been looking at, they're all fake. Every single one." She pulled a USB drive from her pocket. "I'm the one who falsified them." Under Kincaid's orders, Greer leaned forward, his expression grave. "Tell me everything. Those rescue cats. They're not rescues at all. They're engineered hybrids deliberately bred to be sterile." Tears welled in her eyes. "We create these designer cats for private buyers. Rich people who want exotic pets, but don't want to deal with breeding issues." She opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. "Here's the list of every entry I've altered. Dates, weights, medical conditions, all fabricated to match whatever story Kincaid wanted to tell." Greer scrolled through the document, his stomach turning. "And the cub, I found," Juniper's voice cracked. "That was stage 2. They deliberately weakened it, restricted food and water, just enough to make it look desperate, but not enough to kill it. They wanted to create a viral moment, something that would drive donations and sales." She wiped her eyes. The whole touching rescue narrative. It was manufactured from the start. "My God," Greer whispered. He thought back to that moment when the cub had gripped his hand. What he'd seen as a desperate plea for help had been orchestrated for maximum emotional impact. "There's more," Juniper continued, pulling out a thick folder. "This is the protocol I developed under duress. Kincaid threatened my career, my reputation. Said he'd make sure I never worked in veterinary medicine again if I didn't cooperate. The protocol detailed everything. How to carefully restrict nutrition to create the appearance of neglect. How to stage rescue videos. Even instructions for creating medical records that would pass cursory inspection." Sutton, who had been quietly recording the conversation with Juniper's permission, spoke up from her corner. "This changes everything. This isn't just about stolen animals anymore. It's systematic cruelty masked as compassion. They're literally manufacturing suffering for profit." Greer ran a hand over his face, trying to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. The viral video of him with the cub, which had painted him as a hero, now felt tainted. They'd all been manipulated him. The public, everyone who'd donated to Kincaid's cause. "Juniper," he said carefully, "we can protect you if you're willing to come forward officially. Your testimony could break this whole thing open." Sutton nodded, holding up her recorder. A recorded confession, backed by these documents and your expert testimony, it would be the cornerstone of our experts. We could finally show people what's really happening at that ranch. Juniper's hand shook as she reached for a tissue. You don't understand how far Kincaid's influence reaches. He's got judges in his pocket, politicians, major donors. We'll get you protection, Greer assured her. Federal witnesses have rights. Once this goes public, Kincaid won't be able to touch you. The hybrid breeding program alone is illegal, Sutton added, not to mention the fraud, the animal cruelty, the false advertising to donors. With your evidence, we can build a case that even Kincaid's connections can't squash. Juniper stared at her laptop screen, where dozens of altered records testified to years of deception. I helped create this system, she said quietly. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself I was protecting my career, my future. How do I even begin to make this right? By telling the truth? Greer said firmly. Help us stop them from hurting more animals. Help us show people what their donations are. Really funding. The night stretched on as Juniper continued her confession, detailing years of systematic deception. Each revelation hit Greer like a physical blow. The careful manipulation of public sympathy, the calculated cruelty disguised as rescue work, the complex web of lies that had turned suffering into profit. What had started as a simple animal welfare case had evolved into something far darker. This wasn't just about stealing cats or falsifying papers. It was about manufacturing heartbreaking stories for profit, about turning compassion itself into a commodity. As dawn approached, they had filled several hours of recordings and compiled a substantial file of evidence. Juniper looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if unburdening herself had lifted a great weight from her shoulders. What happens now? She asked. Now, Sutton said, carefully storing her recordings. We start building our case. Every detail, every document, every piece of evidence needs to be bulletproof, because once we go public with this, Kincaid will throw everything he has at discrediting us. Greer nodded, his determination hardening. The stakes had grown far beyond what he'd initially imagined, but so had the importance of exposing the truth. People needed to know that their compassion was being exploited, that their desire to help animals was being twisted into profit for people who deliberately caused suffering. Greer sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of documents under the harsh fluorescent light. His hands trembled slightly as he organized the evidence into clear plastic folders. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake could doom their entire operation. He reached for his secure phone, dialing a number he rarely used. Agent Martinez, I have something you need to see. He spoke in measured tones, explaining the preliminary findings while carefully avoiding specifics that could compromise their investigation. The federal agent listened intently, asking pointed questions about interstate commerce and breeding records. Meanwhile, across town, Sutton hunched over her laptop, crafting a meticulous release strategy. Each piece of evidence would need to be verified, cross-referenced, and time-stamped. Her normally cluttered office was now organized with military precision, whiteboards covered in timelines and contingency plans. The burner phone in Greer's pocket buzzed. It was Cade, his voice tight with anxiety. They're planning something big. Tonight at midnight. He paused, breathing heavily. Kincaid's ordering a complete purge. They're going to burn all the records, sedate the animals, ship them out before anyone can stop them. Greer's heart raced. How sure are you about this? I heard it myself. They're calling it a clean operation. Once those animals are gone, there won't be any evidence left to find. The 72-hour deadline suddenly felt suffocating. Greer quickly called Juniper and Sutton, arranging an emergency meeting at the clinic's back office. Within an hour, they huddled around a worn desk, speaking in whispers despite being alone. We can't wait for official channels, Greer said, spreading out a rough map of the ranch. We need to move now. Juniper nodded, already calculating doses in her notebook. I can prepare transport sedatives enough to safely move the most vulnerable animals, but we'll need a precise head count. Cade can help with that, Greer said. He's agreed to open the service gate on the north side. It's the least monitored entrance. Sutton pulled out her camera equipment. I'll document everything. Multiple angles, continuous footage. We need rock-solid chain of custody on anything we find. They spent the next hour mapping out every detail. Cade would disable the security cameras for a crucial 15-minute window. Juniper would bring her medical kit, ready to stabilize any animals in distress. Sutton would maintain a video record of every document they discovered, every animal they found. Our priority is the most at-risk animals, Greer emphasized, marking potential locations on the map, and any ledgers or records they haven't destroyed yet. We get in, we get out. No heroics. The stakes weighed heavily on all of them. Juniper could lose her veterinary license. Sutton's journalism career could be destroyed. Greer was already suspended. This would certainly end any chance of returning to his job. And Cade, if he was caught helping them, the consequences could be far worse than mere career suicide. The timing has to be perfect, Greer continued. We'll have maybe 2 hours before someone notices something's wrong. Every minute counts. They rehearsed the plan repeatedly, addressing every possible complication. What if an animal was too sick to move? What if they encountered armed security? What if the records were already destroyed? Remember, Greer said firmly, if anything feels wrong, we abort. No evidence is worth risking your lives. They synchronized their watches and double-checked their equipment. Juniper carefully packed her medical supplies, including precisely measured doses of tranquilizers for different-sized cats. Sutton tested her cameras, ensuring each had fresh batteries and empty memory cards. Greer reviewed the exit routes one final time. The sun was setting as they finalized their preparations. In less than 6 hours, they would attempt something that could either save dozens of animals or destroy all their lives. The weight of that responsibility showed on each of their faces. Get some rest, Greer advised, though he knew none of them would sleep. We meet at the North Service Road at 11:30. And remember, if anyone gets caught, deny everything. Protect yourselves first. They separated, each carrying their piece of the plan. As Greer watched them leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But with vulnerable animals at risk and the evidence about to vanish forever, they had no choice but to act. The clock was ticking. In just a few hours, they would either become heroes or criminals. And the line between the two had never felt thinner. The night air hung thick with tension. As Cade's flashlight blinked twice, the signal for Greer's heart pounded steadily as he emerged from the shadows, moving with practiced care toward the first row of crates. Years of handling wild animals had taught him the value of slow, deliberate movements. Start with the critical cases, Juniper whispered. Medical kit ready. She knelt beside each crate, checking vitals before making careful notes of times and doses in her logbook. Greer's hands moved with quiet precision, releasing latches and securing transport doors. The animals inside barely stirred, a testament to their weakened state. Behind them, Sutton's camera whirred softly as she documented everything, serial numbers gleaming under her flashlight, timestamps displayed clearly in each frame, faces of team members as they worked. Got the first row clear, Greer murmured into his radio. Moving to Section 2, the operation proceeded smoothly for the first 30 minutes. They'd managed to secure 8 crates when the night shattered around them. Bright headlights suddenly swept across the yard, catching them in harsh white beams. Greer's stomach dropped as he recognized Kincaid's truck, followed by 3 more vehicles filled with armed men. We've got company, Sutton hissed, camera still rolling. Before anyone could react, an arc of fire streaked through the darkness. The torch landed on the feedhouse roof, flames catching instantly in the dry paper and grains stored inside. The fire spread with frightening speed, orange tongues licking up the walls. Move. Get those animals out, Greer shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. Thick smoke began rolling across the compound, a choking gray wall that crept toward the side clinic where the rescued cub lay in recovery. The sprinkler system should have activated, but nothing happened. Someone had disabled it. Through the chaos, Greer saw Cade running toward them, trying to help. But a guard emerged from the smoke, swinging hard. The crack of impact echoed as Cade dropped to the concrete. Unmoving Cade. Greer's voice tore from his throat. The smoke was getting worse, visibility dropping to almost nothing. Heat pulsed in waves as the feedhouse became an inferno. They'd planned to retrieve the ledger's crucial evidence of Kincaid's operation, but Greer knew they were out of time. Forget the paperwork, he ordered. We're getting out now. Without hesitation, Greer plunged into the suffocating heat. Timbers crackled overhead as he fought his way toward his brother's still form. A beam crashed down, blocking the path. Greer didn't slow. He planted his shoulder under the burning wood and heaved, muscles screaming as he created just enough space to squeeze through. Cade lay crumpled on the concrete, blood trickling from a gash above his eye. Greer grabbed him under the arms and dragged him back, away from the worst of the fire, but they weren't safe yet. The cub's crate was still in the side clinic, directly in the fire's path. Get him clear, Greer shouted to Juniper, passing his brother's limp form to her capable hands. Then he turned back toward the flames. The breezeway connecting to the clinic was already starting to collapse. Support beams groaning under the heat, Greer ran through, feeling the searing air burn his lungs. He found the cub's crate and scooped it up, cradling it against his chest. The return journey was a nightmare of heat and falling debris. Each step felt like it might be his last as the structure crumbled around him. Just as he cleared the breezeway, a deafening crash announced its complete collapse. A wave of sparks and burning timber falling where he'd stood seconds before. Greer stumbled into the relative safety of the parking area, still clutching the crate. Inside, the cub stirred weakly, alive. Nearby, Juniper was already checking Cade's injuries while Sutton continued filming, capturing the devastating evidence of Kincaid's retaliation. The night wasn't over, but Greer had made his choice. Lives over ledgers. The documentation they'd hoped to secure was now ash, but his brother was breathing. The cub was safe, and somehow, they'd find another way to bring Kincaid down. Through the smoke and chaos, Greer heard Kincaid shouting orders, but the words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was getting their injured to safety and saving what evidence they could from this disaster. The night operation had failed in its original objective, but Greer knew he'd made the right call. No piece of paper was worth a life, any life. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock their defeat. The small group huddled in Juniper's clinic, exhausted and covered in soot, their lungs still burning from the smoke of last night's fire. The acrid smell clung to their clothes, a constant reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. Greer sat with his head in his hands, the weight of potential failure pressing down on him. Most of their evidence had gone up in flames, ledgers, documents, everything they'd hoped would bring Kincaid to justice. Without it, the ranch owner would likely walk free. While Greer faced losing his badge permanently, Cade winced as Juniper cleaned the gash above his eye, his face bruised but his spirit unbroken. "I'm sorry, Greer," he said hoarsely. "We tried." The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment monitoring the rescued cub. The animal's survival seemed like their only victory, and even that felt hollow, given the bigger picture. Suddenly, Sutton straightened up from where she'd been reviewing her equipment. "Wait," she said, her voice gaining excitement. "Wait, just a minute." Her fingers flew over her laptop keyboard as she pulled up an audio file. "What is it?" Greer asked, lifting his head. "During the initial incident, when you were waiting for the seizure warrant," Sutton adjusted some settings, and clear audio filled the room. "I always keep my boom mic running. Listen to this." The recording played crystal clear, a conversation between the judge's aide and deputies, explicitly instructing them to delay Greer's warrant request. The obstruction of justice couldn't have been more obvious. "That's court interference," Greer said, standing up straighter. "That's proof they deliberately prevented me from saving that cub legally." Juniper's eyes suddenly widened. "The protocols?" she whispered, then rushed to her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed the hospital's secure server. "Every medical procedure I developed for Kincaid's operation had to be documented and stored according to hospital policy, including," she turned the screen to show them, "her complete sterilization protocol for the hybrid cats. Thoroughly documented with timestamps and watermarks that even Kincaid's influence couldn't touch." The scientific evidence was irrefutable, showing exactly how the ranch had been engineering deliberately sterile cubs for profit. "The hospital's security is federal grade," Juniper explained, her voice stronger now. "These records can't be altered or deleted without leaving traces. It's all still here." Cade pushed himself up from the examination table, grimacing but determined. "I'll testify," he declared, "about the burn orders, the planned sedation of the animals, everything. I heard Kincaid give those instructions myself." Hope began to spark in the room as they realized what they had. Court obstruction caught on audio, verified scientific documentation of illegal breeding practices, and a first-hand witness willing to testify about the attempted cover-up. Greer immediately called his federal contact, laying out their new evidence. The response was immediate and decisive. With these three elements aligned, they had enough for a federal raid. The agent promised to mobilize a team immediately. Sutton was already in producer mode, her fatigue forgotten as she planned their media strategy. "We need to script this perfectly," she said, laying out her notebook. "A live segment during the raid ensures everything happens in broad daylight, with public pressure making it impossible for Kincaid to squirm away." She began outlining the story, weaving together the elements of their evidence into a compelling narrative that would captivate viewers while maintaining journalistic integrity. "We'll need to time this precisely," she explained. "The federal agents moving in, our broadcast going live, everything coordinated for maximum impact." The sun was fully up now, its light streaming through the clinic windows. Greer looked at his unlikely team, his injured but resolute brother, the veterinarian who'd risked her career for justice, the journalist whose attention to detail had saved their case. Together, they'd found a way forward when all had seemed lost. "Let's get to work," Greer said, pulling out his phone to coordinate with the federal team. They had the evidence, they had a plan, and most importantly, they had the truth on their side. It was time to bring Kincaid's operation down once and for all. The next few hours were a flurry of activity as they prepared for the raid. Juniper secured backup copies of her medical protocols, while Sutton fine-tuned her script and coordinated with her news team. Cade wrote out his statement, ensuring every detail of Kincaid's illegal orders was properly documented. The pieces were falling into place, transforming their earlier defeat into the foundation for something bigger than they'd initially planned. What had started as a rescue attempt for a single cub had evolved into an operation that could shut down an entire network of animal trafficking and abuse. Each piece of evidence strengthened their case. Sutton's audio file proving the corruption reached into the local courthouse. Juniper's medical records documenting the systematic abuse of animals for profit, and Cade's eyewitness testimony tying it all together. The federal agents were confident. This was exactly what they needed to move forward with a full investigation. The morning sun cast long shadows across Kincaid's cattle auction grounds. Buyers milled about, sipping coffee and chatting as if the charred remains of the feed house weren't still smoking in the distance. The air held a false sense of normalcy that made Greer's skin crawl. He watched from his unmarked vehicle as pickup trucks and horse trailers rolled in for what was supposed to be a routine auction day. But something else was coming. Right on cue, dark SUVs with tinted windows began filtering into the parking area, taking strategic positions around the perimeter. Sutton stood nearby, her camera crew ready. She looked different today, professional in a pressed blazer, but with the same fierce determination in her eyes. She adjusted her microphone, waiting for the signal. The federal agents moved with practiced precision. They emerged from their vehicles in waves, tactical gear visible under their windbreakers. The lead agent raised his hand, and the operation began. "We're live," Sutton announced into her camera, her voice steady and clear. Federal agents are now serving multiple warrants at Kincaid's ranch, where evidence of animal trafficking, cruelty, and systematic fraud has emerged. The chaos erupted in seconds. Buyers scattered, vehicles peeled out of the parking lot, and ranch hands raised their hands in surrender as agents swarmed the grounds. Greer moved forward with the team, scanning the crowd for Kincaid. He spotted him near the holding pens, his face twisted with rage. Their eyes met across the yard. In that split second, Greer saw the decision form in Kincaid's eyes before he made his move. Kincaid lunged forward with surprising speed, pulling a hunting knife from his boot. Before anyone could react, he grabbed Greer, pressing the blade against his throat. "Back off," he shouted to the approaching agents, "or I'll open him up right here." Greer remained calm, his mind racing through options. The holding pens, he knew them like the back of his hand. Every gate, every chute, every angle. He could use that. "You're just making it worse." "Kincaid," Greer said evenly, allowing himself to be pulled backward, toward the pens. He could feel the knife trembling against his skin. Kincaid was unraveling. Carefully, deliberately, Greer began working the situation. He stumbled slightly, forcing Kincaid to adjust his grip. Each movement brought them deeper into the maze of gates and chutes. Greer knew where he was leading them, the narrow squeeze chute used for cattle vaccinations. "You think you're so righteous," Kincaid snarled in his ear. "You destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself," Greer replied, inching them closer to his target. "Every falsified record, every abused animal, every bribed official. Just a few more steps." Greer could see Sutton's camera tracking them, federal agents moving into position around the perimeter. One chance to get this right. With a sudden burst of strength, Greer dropped his weight and twisted, throwing Kincaid off balance. The knife sliced air instead of flesh. Greer rolled, kicking out at a gate lever. The heavy metal gate swung, forcing Kincaid to jump backward, right into the squeeze chute. Greer scrambled up, slamming the latch home before Kincaid could recover. The rancher was trapped, cursing and thrashing in the narrow space. Federal agents swarmed in, cuffs clicking shut around his wrists through the bars. "Rusty Kincaid," the lead agent announced formally, "you're under arrest for animal trafficking, criminal conspiracy, attempted murder of a law enforcement officer." The arrests rippled across the county like waves in a pond. Judge Martinez resigned. The next day, already under federal investigation for obstruction of justice, indictments followed for over a dozen conspirators, corrupt officials, fake transport companies, black market animal brokers. In the weeks that followed, justice took many forms. Greer sat in the chief ranger's office, his reinstatement papers on the desk between them. "It wasn't the viral video that did it," his chief explained. "It was how you handled everything after. You chose to work within the law, even when it would have been easier not to. That's the kind of ranger we need." Cade found his own path to redemption. He left his security position at the ranch to work with legitimate animal sanctuaries, using his experience to safely transport rescued animals to their new homes. "It feels right," he told Greer. "Like I'm finally doing what I should have been doing all along." Juniper's testimony proved crucial in the trafficking cases. She provided detailed records of the hybrid breeding program, helping prosecutors understand the scope of the operation. After the trials, she opened a small veterinary clinic on the outskirts of town, modest, legitimate, and dedicated to doing things the right way. But the most meaningful resolution came on a quiet morning at the Wild Heart Animal Sanctuary. Greer walked through the peaceful grounds, approaching a special enclosure where a young leopard lounged in the sun. "Hey Cinder," he said softly, using the name the sanctuary staff had given the cub he'd rescued months ago. The leopard's ears perked up at his voice. She was healthy now, her coat glossy, her eyes bright. She padded over to the fence where Greer knelt. Without hesitation, she reached her paw through the mesh, wrapping it gently around his offered hand. Greer felt his throat tighten. This was the same paw that had gripped him desperately in that wire crate, when she was barely clinging to life. Now it held him with strength and trust, completing a circle that had begun in darkness, but ended in light. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "We both did. If this ending felt like it was written for you, subscribe and join me tomorrow for another story that might feel the same.